So good to be talking to you again, John.
You too, Glenn. So what's up today?
Well, uh, stuff comes over the transom, as you know. People write to us, they appeal to us, they share information, they tell stories. And recently, someone from the state of Oregon, is it not Oregon? I sure hope I
I
get
say
this right.
Oregon. I think more people these days under a certain age say Oregon. I don't know about the Oregon, but Oregon.
Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about. Um, Sent us a memorandum, an instruction booklet, a guide, a teaching guide on math education in the state that had some features about how you do anti-racist math education that were very interesting. And you wrote about it in your newsletter. Everybody should, of course, subscribe to John's
John
newsletter.
McWhorter.substack.com. Yes, please.
It's free. It's free, by the way.
It can
And
be
you
free.
you can get his postings by increment of his new book that he's working on. John can do this better than I, but I like promoting John's work
Thank you. Thank you.
called The Elect. And it's about the anti-racism mania that is surrounding us and overtaking us, of which this Oregon, that's what I say, uh, math education booklet is an example. Why don't you tell folks what that's about, John?
Well, this thing has been kind of bouncing around for a while, but apparently the people in Oregon who are in charge of education are thinking of taking it seriously. And it's this good 80-page document that is making a claim that there is a need for math teachers to cleanse themselves of their unintentional racism, that there's a such thing as anti-racist math. Now, anti-racist math is partly calling attention to Black mathematicians and calling Black students' attention to the potential of being in STEM fields. All of that is fine, but that's not what most of this document is. This document actually outlines, these are serious people who outline explicitly that it is racist to teach math to Black kids in a way that expects them to actually get the exact answers. And I'm not kidding. The document actually specifies, these are people with straight faces, that when you're teaching Black kids, the anti-racist way of teaching is to teach them to think of math conceptually rather than as a matter of procedure, which in this case, what they're talking about, what they fill out when they talk about, is that you don't necessarily need them to get the right answer and learn how to do math. You are doing fine if you're just teaching them what math is for, what the general aim is. And you're not supposed to have students raise their hand before they talk because there's something patriarchal about it. The teacher is not supposed to be superior to the students. The idea is not that the teacher teaches and the students learn, but that everybody learns together. That students are not supposed to be put into help-e relationships because that implies hierarchy and that's racist. But most importantly, the idea is that we're supposed to wrap our heads around the notion that it is unfair to expect Black kids to actually get the answers, and that if they're not coming up to your expectations, it's racist of you to think that that's a problem. Rather, you should adjust your expectations and understand that it's racist to expect Black kids to actually do math. Now, isn't it interesting that Strom Thurmond could have written this? But instead, it's various living modern people who think of themselves as on the side of the angels, who think of this as higher reasoning, as moral enlightenment, and more to the point. There are people in positions of power who are reading this pamphlet and actually taking it seriously. This
Do
is
you?
bigotry on the march, right?
I just want to ask: do you actually, in the Substack newsletter post, quote from the document itself?
I do
Are you are
extensively.
you in a position to be able to give us just the flavor of what's actually being said in this
Mhm.
teacher's guide? This is a guide to instructors who are in K through 12 or probably K through 8 math classes about how to engage in anti-racist pedagogy while they're teaching math to their students. And John's just given a summary, but I think if we can share some of that explicit language, it'll help to
Yeah,
focus this.
I'm going to call it up here on my phone and
Good.
read from it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a beautiful jargon involved in all of this these
Exactly.
days. And so, let's see, one of it is the framework for deconstructing racism in mathematics offers essential characteristics of anti-racist math educators and critical approaches to dismantling white supremacy in math classrooms by visualizing the toxic characteristics of white supremacy culture. Okay, that's nice. At another point, we have to make sure that the kids are, quote unquote, reclaiming their mathematical ancestry. The idea is that we have to learn about Black mathematicians in the past. We have to reclaim. Okay, that's fine.
It's not
And
okay. Excuse me for interrupting. I don't think that's okay. I'm happy
you
to
don't
say
think
why.
so?
I'm happy to say why later.
Okay. And let's see, where else do I quote? Let's see. A focus on getting the quote unquote right answer, and it's in quotes. A focus on getting the quote unquote right answer is, and then in italics, perfectionism, or it's either or thinking, which is apparently racist. The idea that it's either one thing or the other, i.e., logic, discrimination, science. Racist to expect Black kids to think that way because we're just all so goddamn holistic. Apparently, that's the idea. So those are some direct quotes from the document. It's also paternalism and power hoarding. Requiring students to raise their hand before speaking can reinforce paternalism and power hoarding, in addition to breaking the process of thinking, learning, and communicating. And you know, something typical of documents like this, I've seen this sort of thing also argued about language arts in the past, is that often a lot of big words, but always a little bit awkward. It always reminds me of the old In Living Color routine where Damon Wayans used to do this guy in prison, and he's educated himself in prison, and he's using all these big words. And a lot of the big words are scatological. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. Well, we have to menace the defecation of the blah, blah, blah. And so here, you know, reinforce paternalism and power hoarding in addition to breaking the process of thinking. What are you breaking the process? What? Breaking the process of thinking, learning, and communicating. That's the sort of thing that's in this. And I have to make it clear that I'm not cherry picking a few weird sentences. It's not that the extremism comes only at the end or somewhere in the beginning. This is the whole document, and it rigorously teaches these teachers to think about these things on a month-by-month basis. What are you doing in February? What are you doing in April? And all of this stuff is repeated again and again and again. It's truly unfortunate to see something like this make it beyond, say, one crazy local PTA. You know, it's one thing for somebody to come up with this and pretend that it makes sense. For this to be treated as something of influence and substance is very post-June 2020. That's the problem that's going on now, that this thing is actually being taken seriously by people who've decided that this is a good thing for Black people, that they have to display their anti-racism by denying Black kids the ability to master the exactness involved in doing math. I think this is truly a terrible thing. I feel condescended to as a Black person. And I think that everybody in the country should be on guard for their school board possibly taking any nonsense like this seriously.
Well, I support you 100% in that. The reason I was objecting to the mathematical heritage stuff is I don't understand why a quote unquote white mathematician who might have lived 150 years ago or 500 years ago isn't also a part of the heritage of a kid who sits in the West in the year 2021, a kid whose parents, whose grandparents, whose great-grandparents, and whose great-great-grandparents were born in the West. I mean, how is it that that's not our heritage? How, quote unquote, our? How's that not our heritage? You can't be serious. My heritage is driven by the color of the skin of someone who lived on another continent, in another century, in another culture, but they had the same color of my skin, and that's my heritage. So a kid who sits in Oregon in the year 2021, a Black kid, a kid who happens to be Black or brown, thinking about mathematics is being instructed that they should attend to the color of the skin of the mathematician, and that's somehow their heritage. I mean, that's as backward, it seems to me, as you could possibly get. And by the way, it's a dead end because as it happens, it was Leibniz and Isaac Newton who invented the calculus. As it happens, they were Europeans. You're going to lose that one if you start with a sheet of paper and a line down the middle of it in a column, their heritage, my heritage, their heritage, my heritage. If you're talking about the modern technological world, you're going to lose that one. Why would we teach our kids to, in effect, reduce themselves to the color of their skin when their intellectual inheritance is the total corpus of what humankind has been able to produce? So I'm, deeply troubled by that way of inducting young people into the world of ideas and the world of knowledge. They should learn Swahili or Yoruba as a way of approaching their way of counting numbers. There's a Black way of thinking about solving algebra problems. There's Black geometry. I mean, it's frustrating in the extreme, really.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm exercised about here is anti-racist pedagogy in a fourth grade math class. Mm-hmm. There's barely enough time to actually teach them the multiplication tables, let alone to engage in what is an ideological enterprise. I mean, there's no way, I think, of escaping that. This is a programmatic, ideological, political indoctrination / education enterprise. And you barely have time enough to do the stuff that actually needs doing so that these kids can be empowered to be effective participants in the modern world. And you're taking time to negate white supremacy in mathematics, which is connoted by things like the presumption that a problem has one and only one answer. This stuff has gotten out of hand.